In the previous episode of our series Corrupting the Youth, we looked at the Euthyphro dialogue. And from that dialogue, we learned that Socrates was accused of not believing in the gods and that he was influencing others, especially the youth, to do the same. He was accused of corrupting the youth. Today, I want us to have a look at another dialogue, which is not really a dialogue, and it is known as the Apology of Socrates. The Apology of Socrates is the speech delivered by Socrates in court to defend his position and actions. In the common language, to give an apology is to apologize or to say I'm sorry. But the word apology comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to give a defense or an answer, or simply to defend one's position and actions. Now, in his opening remarks before the court, Socrates points out that his accusers have told the judges to be careful and not be deceived by him because he's an accomplished speaker. But Socrates denies this. He says he speaks the truth. He's not like the orators or the public speakers who like using stylish phrases, but he speaks the truth and trusts in the truthfulness of what he says. He does not toy with words. He tells the court to pay no attention to how he speaks, but focus on whether what he says is just or not. He starts by addressing old accusations. Apparently, there were people who were claiming that Socrates is a wise man and he's a student of all things in the skies and below the earth. And he has this ability to make weak arguments sound strong and strong arguments sound weak. And because of the things he studies, he does not believe in the gods. He is persuasive and he teaches others to be like him. Socrates defends himself by pointing out that there are people who go around teaching and persuading young people, and he's not one of them. He says young people spend money on sophists and orators to teach them eloquence and rhetoric, and he has never been anyone's teacher. He says the only thing he possesses is human wisdom. He then remembers that the oracle of Delphi declared him to be the wisest man in Athens. After hearing this, Socrates started examining many people who were considered to be wise. He says he did this to confirm if he was really the wisest man in Athens. After examining many people, he found that those with the highest reputation were nearly the most deficient, and that young people enjoyed hearing people being questioned by him, and people started to dislike him because he was questioning them in front of young people. Since people started disliking him, he says they became jealous of him and started slandering him and speaking ill of him. And Socrates says to the court, he is not going to stop speaking the truth because he does not fear anything, including death. He does not fear death because he does not know whether it is a blessing or not, and therefore he cannot fear that which he does not know. Socrates says he will never stop practicing philosophy, even if the court instructed him to do so. He will obey the god rather than the court. And by killing him, he says they will harm themselves and not him. Socrates believed that he would have died young if he had participated in politics and no one would have benefited from him. He had this inner voice that prevented him from taking part in politics, and they would have killed him because of his opposition to corruption and injustice. He says the man who loves justice must lead a private life if he is to survive. After giving the first part of his speech, Socrates was found guilty and his accusers requested a death sentence. And he said if the court decides to fine him or to give him a fine, he won't pay the money. And if they decide to imprison him, he considers imprisonment to be the same as death sentence. And if they decide to exile him, he won't stop practicing philosophy and they will find him guilty again. After giving his response to the request of his accusers, they gave him a death sentence. And he said, no man in war or in trial should contrive to avoid death. In war, you can avoid death by throwing your weapons away or by begging your opponents for peace. There are many ways to avoid death in any danger. It is not difficult to avoid death. It is more difficult to avoid wickedness because it runs faster than death. In other words, he says, He could have avoided death by being a coward or by quitting what he does, but by doing this, he would have surrendered to evil. Evil is difficult to avoid because it runs faster and produces short-term results. Socrates believed that in the afterlife, no one was going to judge or kill him for examining his own life or the lives of his fellow citizens. He believed that there are better judges in the afterlife.